All right. It is my favorite time of the year. And that is just on the heels of March Madness. Like, if you love sports, you have to love the NCAA tournament for both men and women. And honestly, at all levels, Division One, Division Two, Division Three, and NAIA. And I have to send a special shout out to my colleagues at the College of Idaho. Their men's basketball team brought home the championship trophy in the NAIA championship about 2 weeks ago. It was so fun to follow that team and that coaching staff led by Colby all season long. But that is what college athletics and really sports in general is about. The moments that you see with these young people who have probably been playing basketball, in this case, for their majority of their lives, having an opportunity to end their season cutting down the nets. But only one team can cut down those nets. And for the other teams, whether you made it to the tournament or not, it literally is the agony of defeat. But winning is so special. And we just saw it in that clip from the LSU Iowa game and how jubilant the LSU team was, the coaching staff. You have Kim Mulkey, who's won championships before, but you saw it in her eyes how meaningful it was. And I cannot wait to have this conversation with you all today about March Madness, and not just what happened on the court, but what's happening in women's sports and women's basketball specifically, but also what's happening off the court. So on today, it's a historic day for a variety of reasons. This is our first Facebook Live on Unlocking the Club. And as your host for Unlocking the Club, the podcast, it has been a pleasure being on this journey. But this is our first Facebook Live. And I think there's another historic event happening across the country in New York City that you all may be getting ready for in about an hour. So we thought we'd come to you, give you an excuse to stop checking email, stop working, and getting ready to sit down and watch the news to see what was happening in our country with a little basketball talk. But it's not just going to be me. Thankfully for all of you, you're not just going to have to listen to me for an hour talk about basketball. We are going to have the opportunity to talk to my girls. We go way back in the podcast game, but we are going to get a chance to talk to Mia Jackson and Beverly Oden as we talk a little hoops action, ladies. Welcome to Unlocking the Club. It is great to see you both. How are you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
Always good to see you in the DMV. Mia, and you, right? There's two people from the DMV, Angel Reese and her cousin, who both won the championship. So there's got to be a lot of excitement going on in the DMV around basketball.
Oh, yes. Jordan said today in one of his tweets that the cookout is going to be lit. When people were asking him about how it's going to be this summer with them, with the two of them home with the championship. So it's great to see. Really excited about the tournament this year. I'll admit, a little bit deflated when the Stanford women were knocked out. And I almost just said, forget it. I did actually for a couple of days. I don't want to watch anything. But
you and me both.
Yeah, because I came back to it because there was so much exciting action happening, and looking forward to when we can come back, because now Kim Mulkey has knocked Tara out of that third position as the coaches with the most championships. So I want Tara to come back and get that. So we're looking for next year.
Nice. Well, and Bev, you have your own little kind of December madness in volleyball. So what's it like for you watching March Madness?
It's so interesting because I feel like there's nothing like college basketball and March Madness. Like, even coming from another sport, it's just like a next level kind of situation. And what's strange is I haven't really watched in a long time, but I felt compelled to this year because everybody was talking about it and it was so exciting, and like all these things are happening. I had no idea. So I did end up tuning in, and I was just kind of, after having taken a break from it for a while, was shocked by just the level, right, that it's gotten to. It was just like, oh my gosh, this is like riveting television. And I'd kind of forgotten that a little bit. So it was a nice reminder that, wow, this is an amazing thing that is specific to basketball, college basketball.
Yeah, you're both so right about that. Like, and that's one of the reasons that we all came together to have this conversation. So often, like if there's something newsworthy happening in sports, we'll get on a text chain. And since our days in 2012, 2013-ish, when we had Game Changers Live, we don't have as many opportunities to formally get on air and talk about sports. But we were never about just talking about the final score. We were always about talking about the things between the lines, the narratives. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you all about. Like, to Bev, to your point, just seeing the growth of women's basketball over the course of the last couple of years at all levels, it's been tremendous. To see the voices that are showing up with these new platforms that they have. And I think Nneka Ogwumike was one of those individuals, a Stanford name, that did this prominently a few years ago during the bubble, during the COVID years, and really starting to allow women to have this platform to show how they are going to be fighters for social justice in a lot of different ways. And Dawn Staley is somebody that we know well, who has done that so poignantly over the last few years. And then we want to kind of talk about, as Black women, like, right, what we see and observe when you see this discourse happening around sports. And is it good? Sometimes bad press is the best press, right? Right. Just getting any type of media, and want to talk about that a little bit. But just your thoughts, Mia, just on the tournament as you're observing it. Do you fill out the bracket for both the men's and the women? If so, like, how did your brackets end up? And what were your thoughts as you took a look at the women's tournament in particular?
I actually just did a mental bracket this year. I did not sit down and actually fill out the bracket, and I wished I had. Especially as everything started to shake out and you start seeing those number one seeds fall so quickly. I was like, gosh. And then I'm following, more so than my bracket, I'm following the number of brackets that actually got it right. I remember at one point there were only like 37 brackets that called the tournament out of something like 20 million. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was like after the first two rounds, right? It was already down to 30.
Crazy. And I said, those are the people who just picked. I don't care what anybody said. They just picked on mascots and people I like, or names I like. Because there's no way in heck they picked it on basketball.
Yeah.
So that was definitely interesting. Just gearing up, kind of like you, Bev. I hadn't been following as much. I will admit that I'm a homer, so I follow much more closely when Stanford women are in there, and I pay attention a lot more closely. But it is good to see how it's grown so much, and looking at the numbers, the actual sheer numbers in viewership. And it's what this year, I think they said the women's game surpassed any NBA game on ESPN this year. So that's pretty amazing. Now I just want the money to match it.
Yeah.
That's all, because you see this excitement that they're generating all around the globe. And then you read, well, can she just go ahead and stay in college one more year because she can make more money on NIL than she can as an actual WNBA player? That's just not something that we need to hear right now. These women need to be paid what they're worth.
Well, and you said something really important right there, the money, right? Yes. What we heard a couple of years ago, right inside of COVID, when those videos showed up where the women's weight room at the women's Final Four paled in comparison to this extravagant weight room and access and resources that they had at the men's Final Four. And I think the Stanford trainer was the first one to note that. And then a player from Oregon was the second one to really put it on blast. And that was a catalyst for them reaching out to an outside consulting firm to actually do a study. And the study revealed that there's a lot of inequities, and the amount of money that is plowed into women's basketball pales in comparison to what they're doing with men. And there's no way, if you don't invest, there's no way that you can see a return. And some of those things started to shift over the last year, last 2 years, and now we see the results. It's about time. And Bev, you obviously were an elite athlete. Like, what is your perspective? Like, Mia just talked about the ratings. We'll show you those ratings in a little bit. But for you, how does it feel to see women, whether it's basketball players, volleyball players, finally get a platform to be seen in the media to actually cover their games?
Yeah, so that I think is the most fascinating part for me of watching how this played out, because my mom was the one who called me and said, you got to watch this. Turn this on. This girl's good, right? And I was like, wait, what? Okay, let's look at it, And so in watching that and sitting with her and being like, no, she can move. She's fast. She's this. My mom's like totally into it. And so after the game, we're sitting there and we're watching the coverage after. And I thought what was interesting is that the way they're weaving, and this is maybe me as a journalist, right, is just noticing the way they're weaving women's sports into the regular broadcast, right? So before it was just all men, all men, all men, right? And if you want to know about women, you got to do a deep dive into the internet, right, to find out, well, what happened in the women's game. Yeah. And I love the way that they're weaving in. They're like, okay, here's a men's clip, here's a women's clip. Here's a men's. So it's not like, oh, the women are at the last 2 minutes, so if you want to turn it off, go for it, right? Yes. It's like, no, we got men coming up after this, and we're going to go men, women, men, women. And I thought, wow, like that's just not a thing that was happening, right? Yeah. Like it's just, so I feel like part of what you're saying about the interest has been like, you know, how can we be interested in a thing we have not seen or heard of or know is even happening, right? So I feel like that part has really changed. And so I was really struck by that. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, you know, I was somebody, that little girl back in the mid 80s, not to date myself, but you can see the gray hair, but who was watching on tape delay the women's Final Four, whether it was Cheryl Miller and USC in the Final Four, but most likely Tennessee, Pat Summitt, and Kim Mulkey, the point guard, who she had this amazing behind the back pass. If you're a hooper, you always talk about that. She threw it behind her back and hit it with her opposite elbow. So it was a total misdirection. It was an amazing play. I'd never seen anything like that before. But you go back to the little girl those days that you had to fight hard to even get a chance to see a little bit of a game to where it is now. And selfishly, I think we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm really more hopeful now than I was before. But I have to give credit to a lot of different folks. Give credit to the sponsors. Bev, to your point, what I noticed this year during the tournament was whether it was AT&T or all the different sponsors, they were weaving in men's coaches and women's coaches, Don and Coach K, coaches that, you know, Coach Lindsay Gottlieb from USC, who may not have the same platform or prominence as a Gino or a Don, but she was in that commercial. And the players from Adam Morrison back in the day, from Gonzaga to Sue Bird, you saw all those things. So the sponsors stepped up. And how hard was that to actually, right, bring in some of the women's players and coaches as well? It wasn't that hard for them to do it, but I think they got a lot of great feedback. The second thing was TV. Kudos to all of the Disney Network, right? ABC and ESPN. ESPN covered all of the games from the first round on, and there were a handful of games that were on ABC. And Don Staley, who we'll hear from in a little bit, talked about, you know, who selected for those ABC games is really interesting. But we're just so glad that you're on ABC, because you're going to get so many more households and so many more eyeballs to get the chance to see the women's game. And so for me, it was so encouraging, because it wasn't just all the superfluous stuff. It wasn't just like the off-court stuff. It was the play. These women were flat out balling. And the fact that you saw NBA players tweeting or watching the games and just like, you know, all the emojis, with Caitlin Clark had 40 points, 2 40-point games in a row, was shooting from Steph Curry range. Like, all of those things matter. And if you give women the chance, always bet on women. Like, right? Mm-hmm. Always bet on Black and always bet on women, right? And you'll see what happens. But
always.
My favorite commercial was the Tamika Catchings one with the Coke commercial, where it was like, oh I just love that they're working women's names into, they even in those Coke commercials, they were working women's names into, like, when they're talking about the greatest of all time, you know, it's just like it was kind of shocking to me, but also awesome.
But I want to make sure that we understand they're not doing that to be generous. They're doing that because there's money there. They're doing that because there's the audience there. Everyone like, oh, they've done such a great thing. Now, no, somebody went, you know, do you realize how much money we're leaving on the table, not covering these incredible women?
Yes.
So this was a hardcore, wonderful business decision for these companies. And I don't want us to get away from that. I don't want us to get away from the fact that these women generate everything from sales, viewership, all of these things. You've got mothers who have their little daughters sitting there watching, and you cannot take that away from the game. So they did it, and they should have been doing it earlier. We know this, but right now it's like, okay, if you're foolish, you can leave the money on the table, but somebody's gonna come take it.
Yeah, Mia, I love that you brought that up, because at the end of the day, it always comes back to money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact, I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories right out there about why the NCAA chose to or not to invest in women, and I buy some of those, like right to be able to keep the men's sports football and men's basketball amateur and not to pay athletes. Like right, you need to make it seem like those sports are funding all the other sports.
Yes.
Right. But we see now that, wait a minute, women's basketball probably in more than a handful of places, not just Notre Dame and UConn and South Carolina, but a lot of places probably could fund, right, their own program. We saw Iowa selling out games consistently. We see the NIL, the name, image, and likeness. And it was so funny to hear all the former players, whether it was Bird and Taurasi on their show or Charles Barkley, Chris Paul, talking about, man, if NIL was there, like I may never have left college, like, right? And I think a friend of mine did a little research the other day and was looking at, Caitlin Clark's net worth, and it had her having like $3 million in NIL deals. I know that Paige Beckers, who didn't play this year because she's been injured for Connecticut, like she was somebody who we knew was pretty prominent and is in a lot of different sponsorship opportunities. So follow the money for sure, but it isn't just about giving money. It's about these companies actually making money as well. And it'll be really interesting to see that as we move forward. And we all know in sports, there's three main buckets of revenue. It's your ticket sales revenue, it's your sponsorship revenue, and it's your media, it's your television revenue. And one of the things that I think was really important that Mia alluded to earlier was the television revenue from this year's tournament. And if we take a look here, this was a tweet yesterday from ESPN's PR, what Mia mentioned. So over 9 million viewers, close to 10 million viewers, that's plus 103% year over year, watch the championship game. In the semifinal game, I think it was 5 million watched Iowa play South Carolina. And that was on a Friday night. So with this peak of 12.6 million people and households around the country watching women's basketball, kudos to, we're going to talk a little bit about the discourse. And race wasn't mentioned, but there's an undertone about it being around race. But I will say that what Dawn Staley has done at South Carolina and the platform that she has, and an undefeated team coming into the tournament, coupled with Caitlin Clark, who is a transcendent player, so much fun to watch, remind you so much of a Steph Curry, one of the best player in the NCAA this year. I think there's other players that are really good too, and Paige Beckers is one of those. But everybody, if you love basketball, men's or women's basketball, you appreciated these players could flat out play. And in that championship game for LSU, it wasn't just their star Angel Reese, but they had players, right, stepping up and making some big time buckets. And people who tuned in were rewarded.
Yeah. Angel Reese right now, going back to the money piece, has more NIL deals than any other college player right now. That might shift a little bit after this with Caitlin's prominence after the tournament, but I am going out to get me some Bayou Barbie gear. I'm a Louisiana girl, so by default, I have to have it, but that means I got to get my nails done when I wear it. Because she'd be like, don't go out here looking raggedy in my gear. But when you look at that and you look at the fact that she's able to use her platform, be herself, as she said, and there were a couple of interviews that I listened to her before the tournament when she talked about why she feels comfortable at LSU and why she feels good. And I grew up, even back then, even long ago, the women, the LSU Lady Tigers, I mean, no, not Tigers, but you know what I mean, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Go Tigers.
Mm-hmm. But they called them, we always the lady.
The lady. Mm-hmm.
But they always pulled an audience. And Angel was saying just how down there she knows she gets more support than the male players get. She said they tease the men in the locker room, she said, because they know that they draw a bigger audience. And so she's able to do that in a place that sustains and supports her. Now you see that when everybody, like to your point, Angela, when people get a chance to see it, then you will have Bev's mom call her and say, girl, turn it on.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Tell your mom that was awesome that she was watching and tell you, look, girl, you need to get to your nearest TV.
Now, how many generations of that? You got her mom, us, our kids, so it's everybody's watching. You got at least 3 generations tuned in.
Yeah. Well,
4,
Mia, I think to your point too, I appreciate you mentioning and alluding to LSU and their program. Sue Gunter, who'd been the longtime legendary head coach there and built this remarkable program. But one of my favorite people of all time, Simone Augustus,
Yes.
legendary future Naismith Hall of Famer, Olympian, and she had taken her LSU team to the Final Four 2 or 3 times, and they never were able to make it out of that semifinal game. And to watch her on TV be a proud mama of watching her program, like that was really, it was just so rewarding to see. And I think that's what women are about. It's like, certainly there's some jealousy that's always going to happen, like, right, you wish you had these opportunities, but I think that all of these women that have come before us, the Nancy Liebermans, right, the Ann Donovans, to the Cheryl Swoops and Lisa Leslies and the Don Staleys, to the Diana Taurasi's and Sue Birds, like, right, everyone is trying to leave the game better than when they found it, and that is what we're starting to see. And so it's nice to see this basketball community coming together and enjoying this. And one of the things I just want to point out in this ESPN tweet was like just the comments. You know, the comments is a tough place to spend time in. But for this particular post, the comments were all so powerful. Like, this is insane. Cook, invest in women, all of these different things. Like, people had that experience. Sports gives you an experience. It's a visceral experience, right? Even if you don't know the teams, the players, I think people got an experience for women's sports that was quite unique here in the tournament. And Bev, would love from you being on the other end of the viewership, like, right, how aware are you as an athlete when you're on that stage of people in the arena and at home watching you play?
Oh gosh, well, hopefully not at all, right? So if you're focused on the game, then you're not thinking about that. But what I loved about the broadcast was that they did bring in some of that history, right? Some of the history of these programs and the women that it was built upon, and how they got to this place. They didn't get to this place in a vacuum, right? There was like all this stuff that had to happen for us to get to this place. And to highlight some of the history that you guys are talking about of these women that built this up, I thought was an amazing kind of way to look at it. Even the coaches kind of did a shout out to some of the people who had built that up. But I mean, as a player, you're in your zone, right? You're in your, you have to kind of block out. That arena was huge and it was packed, right? So if you're thinking about all that, and who's watching at home, 12.6 million people are watching me right now, you're not going to be in a space, right? And so I love that those girls were in their element.
Yeah,
they were doing what they have done day after day after day for a really long time. And there was a level of comfort that you could see that they weren't taking in, like, oh my gosh, this is a huge stage, right? Because that's like a thing that will take you out of the present moment. Yeah. And you could tell they were so in their moment by the way they're interacting with each other, the way they're interacting with their coaches, you know, they're sinking threes from like way out, you know what I'm saying? Like that's a person who's in their moment, right? And I think I love to see that because it could have been a really scary and frightening, like, yeah, you know. And I mean, with Angel Reese, right? She was being herself. Yeah. And there was that was not, you know, sometimes you can tell when people are putting something on, right? Or trying to be something they're not. Like that was not what came across with her. It was like, this girl's being her. Yeah. And the suit that her coach was in, right? So like, to me, it was
that's another show. That might be another full show just to talk about fashion, right?
Right. It's like this is who we are, right? And we're not gonna. I like one of her quotes was like, "I'm unapologetically me," right? And so I felt like the coach was unapologetically her, and she was like, "Look, I got a lot of personalities on this team. I was a personality." She even said in her interview after the game, right?
She was.
So she understands.
She was, and she is.
That's them being who they are. It's not them trying to be something they're not. And to be able to just be like, and normally if I saw a suit like that, I'd be like, what is this woman playing at, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I did not have that reaction to her because that felt like who she was, right? It was like, damn girl, do it. You know, like I got that reaction. And there's a difference between when you're putting something on and when you're just being you. And
Well,
I
it's
feel like that
amazing
would
how
be
like a leopard sequined suit is actually kind of dialing it back from the boa feathered
Hey, I
wings
love the boa.
sleeves that she had before. But Bev, I think that you're bringing us to like the next conversation I want to have with you all, because being unapologetic. And so this is Unlocking the Club, and this is a space where we allow Black women in particular to unlock their truth, share their story, and reclaim their power. And I think that there were so many individuals, but particularly some Black women on that highest stage who did that in a powerful way. And I appreciate what you just alluded to, but I also know that first, that never let them see you sweat, that there's also a lot of pressure on these women, whether it was a Dawn Staley, the coach, or the players, to step up so that they made sure that the people that were coming behind them had a better place. And I think that that's what comes with being a Black woman. There's so much of how we show up is we are not letting people know the burden we're carrying, because we know we may have one moment. We had made one moment to change our lives and the lives of others. And Dawn Staley was someone who showed up in that moment. I want to ask you guys about this. I'm going to play some of her sound here in a second, but I am wondering how much this was weighing on her mind. She's been out front quite often over the course of her entire career, but certainly over the last couple of years. But it feels like she constantly has a clap back about the narratives that the media has about her players, and that has to be a burden, no matter who you are, right? I think that that's one of the things people see. Dawn Staley, she wears a lot of Gucci and Prada and stuff on the sidelines with her Philadelphia Eagles stuff, and she carries herself with such dignity. But you also wonder how much she's carrying that burden, like of having to speak on behalf of everybody, because not everyone has the privilege or the power or the influence that she has. So I want to play this clip for you all and get your feedback here on the back end here in a second. Hold on one second.
While you're queuing it up, Angela, you know, that gets me to that point that we hear all the time, and I think women are putting it up as a mantra. Just because they carry it well doesn't mean it's not heavy. And so
Yes.
that's one of the things that we have to make sure that we, as you said, to your point, look out and be supportive of people like Adon who are choosing to carry this burden.
Yeah, Mia, thank you. Because I think that that's the case. Like, this is one of the things we're Unlocking the Club. Juju's Hook said this to me when I was getting ready to put this podcast together. And I thought it was going to be about golfing, and it ended up being about something I think much more powerful. And she said to me, she's like, Angela, like you're someone who keeps thinking like you're not in the club, like you don't, or you're not sure what club you belong to. But she's like, I'm looking at you from the outside looking in. You're a Stanford grad, like, right? You have your MBA, you played on national championship teams, like, right? Like people look at you and they think that you don't have any burdens, like, right? You are in the club. And that's may not be the case that you feel. And Bev, you talked about in our the episode with you how you feel club adjacent, right? That you never felt like you belonged in the club, and like now you're starting to create your own club. I think that we look at Dawn, and again, she's so giving. She's always been giving since her days in Philadelphia, and again, she's constantly on the days at press conferences, having to clap back, bring to people's attention, and explain, like, right, what she is intending. And then you have people in the media saying, like, no, this is what we were doing. You're like, well, you miss it. You miss actually what this is about. And just because it's not visible to you does not mean it doesn't exist. And if Dawn doesn't bring it to people's attention, who would? And I think that that's an extraordinary burden to have. But we're going to listen to a little bit of her sound here as well. And thanks, Mia. See, that's teamwork right there. I appreciate Mia stepping right in and making sure while I was figuring out the tech that we could keep the show going.
Oh, we're having issues hearing her. We're still working out those.
The audio.
The audio.
Mm-hmm.
But while we're doing that, I think she handled it so well. And I like that she waited and she didn't take attention away from the girls while they were playing, or the women while they were playing, to bring this up in her press conferences. But I can only imagine what she's doing in terms of keeping those women solidly and mentally sound in that locker room.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, Bev, that the comments, whew.
I know. Yeah, I never look at the comments anymore because I've learned my lesson on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what Angela just said too reminded me of, now I'm a budding therapist, right? So I'm trying to get my licensure, right? And so one of the modalities I use is called parts work, right? Where you start to understand these different parts of yourself. And I feel like what you're saying, Angela, is like having to be the person who always has that burden to have to respond or react in a way to these things, right? And how heavy that is on a person.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because when we're responding out of a place of hurt or burden or wounding or whatever, we respond totally differently than when we can just be in ourselves and respond from a place of like an observer almost of our experience, right? And so I feel like it's so easy to get kind of like triggered by the what feels like maybe an attack, right? And then your defensive parts comes up, and sometimes that defense can be like an overreaction or like a big reaction that maybe if you take some time and step back, it'd be a little bit different. But it's just interesting to see how different people can kind of harness, like there is something that needs to be said here, but it doesn't need to be a clapback, right? It doesn't need to be like a really harsh, oh, you came at me, I'm coming at you, right? It doesn't have to be that. It can be more of like a response instead of a reaction. And so it's just interesting to kind of be learning all this stuff and seeing people react out of their wounded parts.
Yeah, in real life, right?
Yeah.
Just watching it in real life.
Right.
You want to try it again now, Angela?
Yeah, we'll see if we can play this video a little bit. My apologies on this. It may not allow us to pull the sound into the studio, but let's see if we can hear what Dawn is saying. If not, I will share what she said on the back end. Can you guys hear that?
No. And I pulled it up as well, just in case.
Yeah, we'll share this link with you in on our social pages so you guys get a chance to watch this video. It's about a 3.5 minutes excerpt from her post-game press conference immediately after South Carolina lost to Iowa in the semifinal game. Again, well-to-do game. Like everyone was talking about the matchup between Caitlin Clark from Iowa and Aaliyah Boston from South Carolina. And South Carolina came up on the short end. But one of the things that Dawn said, a journalist asked her the question of, what do people say about her players? And what does she want to say about that? And her response was that she knew that she wanted to have this conversation, win or lose. Mm-hmm. And so she's not saying this because they lost the game, but she was going to say it regardless. What had happened before this in the press conference, at the end of that game, Aaliyah Boston had been covering up one of her teammates who was crying, like kind of used her jersey to cover that teammate up. Because what had happened 2 years ago when South Carolina lost in the game was there was a picture of Aaliyah that was taken of her crying, right? And, the ugly Black woman cry. Uh-huh. And that was the only photo that was circulated for like weeks and months. And it was traumatic and debilitating to Aaliyah. Like you can tell in the moment, 10 seconds after they lose the semifinal game, her initial reaction is to shield her teammates. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's trauma. And then she got up on the days and she was asked about Dawn Staley and her relationship with Dawn. And she started to cry. And she paused and started wiping her tears away. She's like, please don't take any photos. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I know people are going to take photos. Please don't take photos. And so she had to try to control herself and not be emotional because she didn't want that to be the only images that people showed of her. That's trauma, right? And you know, we've talked about it. Have you joined me on the episode about grief? Like, right, where like there were moments where I didn't think I could cry about the loss of my mother. Mia, you've been so good to me over the last couple of years, and just like sharing your journey and what it was like, and allowing me to be free to like be authentic and to feel that grief. Well, Black women don't get that chance. And Dawn, on the heels of all that, has to speak on behalf of these players. So in this press conference, she talks about she'd heard through the grapevine that media out in public had been talking about her players, thugs, that they play like ballroom brawls, all of these different terms, right? And she said she didn't appreciate that, and that was unacceptable for national media members. Like, right, these weren't just like random media members or bloggers. It was national media members that were saying these things about her players. And she had to go on and talk about, and she said this so often in so many press conferences, she talks about the seniors in particular, but how amazing these young women are, how great they are on the court, but how much better they are in their community and as people. And it feels like you have to defend yourself. It's that stereotype that you're always having to prove that you're good enough and that you're worthy of people looking at you and seeing you fully, right? And understanding you, and not having these racist tropes and narratives. And she had to sit up there on this stage as she's trying to comfort her players and her team, and players who may never play another NCAA basketball game again, and has to respond to that. The only thing that I disagreed with that Dawn said was that she's like, don't be saying this in public where it can get back to me. You know, that's stuff that you should be doing at home or on the phone or texting. I was If you're covering women's sports, women's basketball predominantly is played by Black women, if you don't have an open mind, you should not be covering this sport. And we need to do better in these newsrooms. We need to make sure that we have much more representation at the table, so that people like that are covering the sports actually know the lived experience of those that are playing the sport. So let me get off my soapbox, right?
Oh, no, stay on the soapbox. We just know that because I don't want you to get off that soapbox, because it needs to happen. Yeah. And I think we'll need a follow-up to this. We know this already. And when you get the three of us on here, we keep going. And it never fails. No matter how much we say, we'll be short and concise. But I want to say specifically what one line from what she said, or a couple of lines. She said, "We are not bar fighters. We're not thugs. We're not monkeys. We're not street fighters." I do think that's sometimes brought into the game, and it hurts, because that's what she heard people say. You know, she heard Juno saying it's like going to a bar fight to play them. And you get into all of these issues around respectability politics, wanting Angel to tone down who she is, you know, tone down those edges, girl. No, you know, let her be herself, and brilliant, smart, capable, and all those other things. Not also, you know, or oh my God, you know, don't worry about that because she still is this. No, as if you're apologizing for who she is. Yeah. And when, as Dawn said, you know, people come back to her, tell her what people are saying about her players. That's like sticking a dagger in. They work so hard to be who they are and to get to this level, this highly ridiculously competitive elite level of play, to be called a thug or a bar fighter. Yeah. I mean, that's there's no way. And then when you add into it, if you know the other team, I'll just say the other team, does something, they're just competitive and passionate. And there was even one case that when I was watching the championship game, I rewatched it when we got ready to do this, or was rewatched part of it. And when Caitlin got called for a foul, and a technical in the fourth quarter, the announcer said, "Well, you know, you would just hope there would be some leniency in times like this." Yeah. I'm like, if Kayla had been Boston, can you imagine? Yeah. Yeah. Then they said, she didn't say anything. That's just ridiculous. She didn't say anything. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and one of the things, to be clear, like, and what I loved about the LSU players is they gave Caitlin her flowers, because that girl can play, right? And they all talked about, right? Like I wanted to shut her down, but she still had 30. She's amazing. But what people don't understand, and this goes back to Russell Westbrook in Utah, like, right, sometimes like people are like, I didn't mean it that way. Well, the historical context matters. There's been 400 years of these dog whistles that people have had to deal with. And I know I heard it in the stands in high school and in college of people calling me names and calling me out of my name. Like, right. And you have to deal with it. And you just have to, like, you don't tell anybody about it. You don't complain. Your teammates may not even know. And you just have to grin and bear it. And that's, again, time over time over time is debilitating. But then when you see it from your allies,
Yes.
when you see it from the people that are supposed to be lifting you up and amplifying the game, and they do it for one, but not for others, it makes you question things.
Yeah, I do feel like there's you don't know what you don't know kind of situation here too, because what you were talking about, Angela, about like they have to say it in the light, right? Don't be saying this, that, you know, it's like when I was working in these sports newsrooms, I was the only person who looked like me, right? So there was not, the people who are writing these articles also need to be a more diverse, like, population as well, right? Because it's like when I watch an LSU and their style of play, I have a different reaction to it than maybe a particular white man might react to writing the same thing, right? And so I feel like there is room for learning, but there's also, we need to bring other people into the situation so that we can have these conversations in a better way than just shutting it down, because like it's so extreme, right? You don't want to shut it down because we can't learn, we can't move forward without having addressed some of these things. But it's like they don't even know when they say those things that is based in these long-standing, hundreds of years old racist tropes, right? They just think, hey, whatever, like, I don't understand why you're reacting like this. And I feel like there's some history missing, and there's also some diversity missing from those circles.
Well, and it gets to, oh, this is the woke culture, like, right, and all of that stuff, and you're like, and it feels like, whose pain are you prioritizing? People are like, well, why are you making me feel, I'm covering the game. Like, why are you making me feel bad for this? And you're like, well, who's felt bad for 400 years? Who's the young lady covering her eyes and her tears? Who's the one that's being told when she does a gesture that we'll show you in a moment, she's ghetto and classless, and when someone else does it, she's so competitive, to Mia's point. Her parents must be so proud. She's raised up the game. And Bev, we're going to have to get your buddy Jeff Pearlman on this show, because Jeff Pearlman, in the immediate aftermath, was said that when it's all said and done, Caitlin Clark will be the best women's college basketball player in history. And Caitlin Clark is a baller. She hadn't won a championship yet. I know Breanna Stewart, this isn't about race. Breanna Stewart, I think, won 3 or 4 championships. Maya Moore, Shanika Holtzclaw. We can go on and on and on. Paige Beckers, who's been hurt. Paige Beckers down at UConn, like, right, who's been hurt. So it's funny how, and I think everyone wants Caitlin to be, and she is a great player, but we shouldn't have to take away from her or others. And I have to catch myself to make sure that I'm not taking away from Caitlin, like, right, but also pointing out other things. But I think that we can't have this conversation, and it's very similar. I think sports mirrors life in so many different ways. Like, what we just saw on display is the ugliness that's going on in this country, because we refuse to actually have the conversation, because some people feel like they're being made to feel bad, and they're not accounting for there's a generation and an identity that has felt bad for a long time because they've been erased, right? And so it takes someone like Adon to have these really important conversations. All right. Well, we can go on to this one for, as you all can see, like, right, we get a little bit into this, and we got about 10 minutes before we're going to let you all go. But I do want to bring into the conversation, and no worries, there's no audio on this particular video, but I do want to bring into the conversation the controversy. So I don't know about you all, but one of the things that I appreciated about this game was, usually when ESPN or NBA players or someone posts about a WNBA game or a women's basketball game, immediately in the comments, there's those little trolls that are like, who cares? No one watches them. They're horrible. That's all you see. Well, you didn't see it this time. Like, right, immediately you saw, like, this was a great game. We thought, Iowa was going to win. Kudos to LSU. And then you saw, and I think it was El Presidente, like, right, the guy from whatever his blog platform is, that said that, Angel Reese is so classless. And I did just a search. Like every major talk show had this as a topic: Reese versus Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark. And it was an interesting discourse. And if you look at the comments, it was polarizing, right? And I want to show you actually what people are talking about, the videos of what people are talking about. But I have an interesting perspective about this because I think there's so much more than we are actually seeing being covered than they're actually showing. But this is it, like, right? So this is Caitlin Clark playing in Louisville about a week before, and she did the John Cena Bev. You didn't know what it was, neither did I really know what it was, like, right? And then Angel Reese does the same thing, put the ring on it, but she does it directly to Caitlin Clark. So there's a couple things. Media. So I don't know who Caitlin was doing that to or not. Angel Reese, I saw this from 17,000 different directions. Like, right, you had an overhead aerial shot, you had like,
everywhere
a shot, you saw it from all the different angles. We didn't have that luxury, if you will, to see what Caitlin Clark, but Caitlin Clark is one of the best trash talkers in the women's game, right? She told somebody in that Louisville game to, shut the F up because you're down 15.
Yep.
So she can dish it out herself, right? But yet and still, the discourse was that Angel was trash and classless.
So John Cena, right? Who we know where it comes from. After he posted showing Caitlin, and he said, "Doesn't matter if they can't see, even if they could see you, they couldn't stop you." Right? Because so again, it's getting all this great press. When she did it as an affront, you can't sit there and tell me she's doing that respectfully. That is basically saying you can't touch me. She is talking. She is talking. Yeah. And I love it. I think she should be able to say that. Not a problem for me. But when Angel comes back and said, "Yeah, I saw you and you can't see me now." Oh my gosh, I wish someone said, "I wish she'd taken a higher road." And I'm like, for what?
Right.
Why? Why does she have to take the higher road?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. And they didn't show when Caitlin Clark against South Carolina, which was what fueled LSU players, actually them coming out, because they shot 19% from three all tournament long. They were on fire like they were the Splash Brothers.
Yeah, 9-12 from three in the first half.
Half, right? But they said that it was because what they saw, the disrespect that she had to some of their friends and to South Carolina, their conference mates, like, right? So she had a game, she was up 10 feet off of a South Carolina player, and she kind of waved them off, like, really disrespectful. It
don't matter.
Like, people did, like, we do that all the time. Like, you don't guard people that can't shoot, right? You don't have to make them feel disrespected, and that's that gesture, but no one said anything about it, right? And I'm all for it. I wouldn't choose to do the John Cena. I wouldn't that's not my personality, but I don't take it from anybody else to be able to do it. But what I do take umbrage to is the discourse between the two people under similar circumstances and how we keep moving the goalposts on what is acceptable and what's not.
I gotta say though, and this might be just an athlete spidey sense, but like, I didn't know about that backstory, and I saw this, right? And I said, "That's payback, right?" She did. That's not from nowhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I have been there where you really, something has happened either in the history of you with this team or in the history with that person that leads you to react like that. That didn't come out of nowhere, right? And so then I was like, well, what is the backstory? And then I saw, oh, okay. And you know what's funny is my mom said that Caitlin, she's cocky.
Okay, we gotta have your mom on this show. Your mom be naming things.
I know, right? So I was already like, okay, I think she did something that warranted like some sort of response in that way, right? And I think when you're in that moment, and like we said, what I was saying before about like there's no crowd, there's no, these are two women's teams that are brawling in a mano a mano kind of situation, right? And you're all in, right? And so I feel like that yes, very little was said about what happened before that moment, right? And sometimes in a fight, it's like the person who hits back second is the one who gets in trouble, you know?
Yeah.
But it was like, for me, it was like so clear that like there's something going on here, and this isn't the whole story, but I think if you take it as like, oh, look at this, it's like, oh, what, me, right? Even the technical, right? At some point in that broadcast, they said it was a combination of throwing the ball, and then she also said something, right? We don't know what she said, but she said something, right? So to me, it's like she's not like a shrinking flower, right?
Kill them with kindness. Be like, like under your breath, smiling, like, right? That's.
But I don't think she would want you to think she is. Yeah. I mean, she has gone out there and she walks with that, with swag. She walks it.
Yeah. Right. I love it too, Mia.
Huh?
I love it too. I'm with you. Like, I think it's awesome.
Yeah. But why does she have why does she have to be, oh my gosh, just palatable and respectable? And no, let her be Larry Bird on that court.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let her, but then let Angel do the same thing. Angel, at the beginning of the season, or earlier in the season, she was like, one of the things they used to tell they would give to their opponents was free smoke. She said, because we got to smoke for everybody, free smoke. And I'm like, that's what makes the game even more exciting.
Yeah.
All the different types of players, the quiet assassins, and then the people who come around and do Angel saying, yes, I got my nail done, hair done. You feel like you can hear
Bayou Barbie. The Bayou Barbie.
Like I said, I'm looking for my gear though.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point though, Mia, like there's all different types. And that is at the crux of this, because it's not just a conversation about race. There's race, there's colorism, and there's gender. That is all layered in. So how should a female athlete behave? There's that. But then there's also, and we've talked about this quite a bit on Game Changers Live, we talked about this discourse, and I think many of us are LeBron James fans, but the conversation around LeBron James is very different than it is about Steph Curry.
Oh.
Right. And so there's some colorism there as well, as like he's 6'8", 280 pounds, and Steph looks like he's your cousin next door, right? And so there's a lot of different layers to this, and I think that showed up in the women's game. And again, I go back and forth with, is this getting to where we want to get to? So now the conversation isn't about they're not worthy of playing. Now it's about these other things. It feels to a certain extent it could be a rite of passage, but I hope we end this passage pretty quickly with discourse like Dawn started and having this conversation. And where this also shows up, gets back to Mia's point, the money. There was an article in the New York Times at the beginning of the basketball season where Tara Vanderveer was quoted, and the LSU gymnast got quite upset about it, but was talking about that the NIL was creating similar issues that we've seen in women's sports for years. And if you look at most of the people, Mia mentioned that Angel is one of the players that has the most NIL deals. Quantity, right? Quality will be interesting in that conversation, but that most of the female athletes that get NIL deals look a certain way. Right. And then it's their decision of what they want to do. Like you've had Haley Jones say that she's not going to make it about her body. She's going to make it about different things that she likes, but there are some athletes that are taking advantage. And so Tara was saying that this is bringing us back to, again, sexism in sports. And so that's going to be really interesting. But all of these things, colorism, racism, and gender, play a role in money. Like, how is that money going to get allocated? And then the last thing, before a couple more points, and I think we have some made for TV viewing coming up at a quarter after the hour. But is, in this conversation that we're all having, is like, who's going to lead this discussion? Who's going to make sure, right, that we're not pointing at an 18, 19, 20-year-old and making them have to fight for whatever is right? Because, Bev, to your point, this wasn't just about in that moment, Angel doing this, but it was other things. And it went back, I can point to last year where the conversation, Leah Boston from USC, from South Carolina, was the best player in the country. But a lot of people were trying to make Caitlin Clark the best player in the country, right? And there were a lot of people that felt we want to anoint somebody, right? And she's going to help the game, but has not earned it just yet. And so there's a lot of players that feel some kind of way about what else can I do? I'm the best at what I do. I brought my team to a championship. I represent on and off the court extremely well. And yet and still, I don't get those same opportunities. And that showed up in that moment for Angel Reese, because to her, right, there was a choice people were making in that moment. And what Caitlin had done was disrespecting, but they were being disrespected about who they were, and how people were naming them and the narratives that were being told. So a lot more to discuss, but a couple more things. Mia, you brought this up. I saw it yesterday as well. It was there was an article I saw it on CNN, but Joe Biden, the first lady, was at the games, and she enjoyed the game. She really enjoyed watching Iowa play. And what usually happens, I don't know if this happens in volleyball, Bev. Do you guys go to the White House after you win a championship?
We didn't then, right? I think they might now, actually.
Okay. So back in the day, so my freshman and junior year, we got to go to the White House. Freshman year, UNLV men had won, right? So we got to be at the White House with them. And my junior year, Duke men won. We all had a crush on Grant Hill at the time. And Grant Hill knew it. But those were
he still knows it.
Yeah, those were amazing moments to be at the White House. You're at the White House, and I have a really bad hairdo and a bad dress on, but those pictures are hanging up at my parents' house in Mountain Home. Those are special moments. So in this special moment when LSU barely had just cut down the nets, First Lady, who I have a lot of respect for, came out and said, I would love to invite Iowa to join LSU at the White House. And there's two things. If you're LSU, you're like, heck no, we won. There's no participation trophies in this sport. And if I'm Iowa and I lose, I lost my senior year in the Sweet 16, I wouldn't want to show up at the White House. In that moment, bring me another point. But I'm not I didn't earn my way to the champions visit to the White House. And so Mia, you saw that. What struck you when you saw that?
I was mad. Like you said, this is not a participation trophy game. Yeah. They won, and that's supposed to be a pinnacle. It's supposed to celebrate success. That trip to the White House celebrates what you did, your accomplishment. And it felt to me like you're saying, oh, I know they won, but I just so respect Iowa. Yeah. And I felt like, you were saying, yeah, little girls, thank you. Yeah, we're glad to have you guys here, LSU. But Iowa, what are you? I'm like, you know what? Get it out of here.
And would it have been reverse? If Iowa won,
I'm sure Caitlin, just like we talked about, she is that player with swag, and she's going to have a chip on her shoulder next year, bigger, than Mount Rushmore. Yeah. And I know that she does not want to be celebrated for losing.
Yeah. But if Iowa won, do you think we would see an article that would say, "No, I love that LSU too. That Kim Mulkey, I can't wait to see what she would wear to the White House. I'm going to invite them along with Iowa."
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
No chance.
Bev, I know you know.
Yeah, no chance. And again, I also with you have respect for Joe Biden, and I feel like there's part of this is just she's like a nice person who's like, hey, why don't we all come to the thing? But I agree with you, it would not have happened the other way around, which tells you a lot in itself, right? That if Iowa had won, would she have thought, oh, let's also invite LSU? They play such a good game. I do not think so, right? And that's another thing that she probably doesn't know that is a part of her, right? That even that, right? Oh, I just want to invite, I don't see why it's bad. I just wanted, they both played a good game.
Exactly.
But it's really hard to see for yourself that if it had happened the other way, you wouldn't have done it. So, I have issues with America's only winners count thing, but at the same time, it's this was a huge accomplishment, and there's such a stark racial difference between these two teams, right? There was a predominantly white team and there was a predominantly black team playing each other, right? Usually there's both of each, you have different things. This was so stark. And so to have it happen in this instance, I felt just gave it an extra layer where that it was ooh, Jill, I feel like it for her, she might not recognize it, but this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and that gets to what we talk about in equity inclusion work all the time, intention and impact. So her intention was good. Right. That's why she's in the White House. That's who she's always been. The intention was good. And sometimes you don't see the visibility of the impact that it's going to have, but you're accountable for the impact. So my intention was not to step on your toe and break your toe, but I broke your toe.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for that impact. And that is where like we have to start having these discussions so that people understand that their intentions like don't live in a vacuum, right? Their intentions have an impact and you're accountable for those. And I think if she had that realization, she may have made a different choice. But I know she's surrounded by a lot of women and women of color up in that White House.
Yeah.
So I'm like, who didn't
tell you
get the right talking points?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's another conversation altogether, because there's a lot of times where the talking points are off and the intention and the impact, there's a delta between the two. And the bigger the delta, the bigger the trauma and the harm that is caused. And I think that we've seen that, and we'll kind of leave with this conversation. We've seen that in women's sports for Black women in particular a lot. So Serena Williams, like who I think we all love, and I'm going to miss her at the French Open here in a few weeks, right? But we saw throughout her journey all of the things that she and Venus had to deal with along the way. And, you know, a temper tantrum from them, like, was the end of the world, like, right? And a temper tantrum for John McEnroe was his signature.
Yes.
We saw it for Simone Biles, who, like, chose her mental health over, like, what she'd worked 4 years for, and that could probably cause, like, significant physical harm if she went out there not in her right state of mind, and people not accepting that and being like, you don't not patriotic enough. Like, we see that all the time where people pick and choose, and it feels like it happens quite often to the Black athlete, and in particular for my lens, to the Black female athletes. Mia, like, just what's your, like, you have such a good kind of sense of these things. You've been covering women, sports in general for such a long time, talking to mothers, NFL players. Like, what's your sense of this rhetoric that we keep hearing?
You mean in terms of just the difference in the narratives between the two? It's definitely difficult to watch because we see it played out. No matter how many times you can point it out to people, see, this is what you said specifically about Serena and what you said when John McEnroe went out there and literally crashed his racket. And I don't know if there was an article and a documentary out recently where someone really went through and chronicled all these different points in Serena's career and Venus's career, where people, the things they said to them on the court, how they yelled at them, and how they had to be so closed and quiet for so long until she reached a certain point where she finally said, I don't care. I don't care, because I have to, I have to be me and play me on this court. Up until then, they had to be more docile because it's a white sport. It's a respectable sport, all of those other things. And for parents trying to manage the mental health of their kids, and Bev, I know this is something I definitely want to hear your take on, trying to manage the mental health of their kids when they're saying, I know I'm just out here playing and being me and I feel this way, but then people talk about you. Oh, he's a thug. Oh, she's, oh my gosh, she's classist. Just some of the things we're hearing right now. How do you go home and tell your child, baby, it's okay? You did exactly what you were supposed to do. And I think that those things don't stay with them, sting, and they carry them forward. And sometimes, to your point earlier, Bev, sometimes their responses are not just their natural, genuine, personal response. It's a reaction to something that they heard for the last 10 years. And so then people really get upset. And then, as a parent, you have to be so hands-on. And you have to be out there, and you can talk about how crazy Richard Williams was and all of those things, but he was really clear you were not going to mess with his daughters. And he might have had to have that bit of crazy, honestly, in order to manage all of that.
Well, do you guys remember that video where he was in the room when a young Venus was being interviewed, and I think the journalist asked her like a question like, do you really think you can win, or something like that? And she was like, yes. And he's like, no, really. And Richard had to be like, she does. She does. Right? And I know there's some other choice words in the back of his mind too. But that is the question. You question someone thinking that they have the nerve to think they belong.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on the femininity piece too, right? So because part of this is not we expect females to doubt themselves or to be humble or to come at this from a different angle, where men, it's okay for them to be like, yeah, I'm the greatest, right? Like I'm the best that's ever lived. That's okay. But coming from a woman, it's just got a different, like it just gets taken differently. We've seen this in, when women are running for office as well, right? Like that ability to toot your own horn, it's not a good look for a woman still, right? And so part of that is a reaction to that, right? It's just, I love though when women are like, because what you're talking about, Mia, is like these people, a lot of these athletes are young people, right? Some of them are teenagers, right? If I think about how developed I was as a teenager to be able to be like, this is who I am, and it's okay if you come at me like that. I was not in that place.
Yeah.
And most teenagers are not in that place, right? Because it's just like they care. They want likes. They care about what people are saying and doing around them. And so it's really hard to separate that out, to be like, okay, yes, I'm being myself. You don't like it. You know what? That's a thing you kind of get at a later stage of a development, that it makes me sad that we're putting all this on these young athletes. But I'm also sort of encouraged that some of them are stepping into it. It's almost like how, you could say what you want about the pronouns or whatever, but it's like there are certain societal restrictions that some of these young people are just shirking. They're just like, you know what?
Yeah.
Deal with it. And there's a part of me that just loves that, right? I just love that they're able to do that, because that was just not an option before. And so I think there is some growth going on there, but it's also just really hard at that stage of development to be able to have that presence of mind.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, in actuality, how much of it is true. Part of it is, as an athlete, it's all about mindset. So you manifest that. Right? Because you have to think you're invincible, because if you don't, as soon as you start to doubt yourself, then you can't perform at that high level. And so you start to see, to your point with the social media, all of these external influences, you post something and people are going to be up in your comments, right? And it's, I don't know how they navigate that. And they are taking so much pride in having a platform and being able to speak out. And again, I'm a big LeBron James fan, but I think that this new generation, the more than an athlete, they do feel compelled to share their truth in a way that we didn't feel like we had that agency to be able to do that. But I also worry about them, because that's a huge burden. They don't even know who they are at 18, 19, 20 years old, right? But they're telling themselves that, and that might protect them to a certain extent, but it's also our responsibility. The adults in the room, and the media are adults in the room, coaches are adults in the room, athletic directors, right? All these people are the adults in the room as well. And we should not just hold them accountable, the players, for doing that. We all should be accountable for making sure we start to shape and change these narratives. And I think women's basketball's narrative has changed as a result of Angel Reese and Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark. And Paige Becker stood up at the ESPYs and talked about, look, I know that there's other people that don't look like me that should be getting these same opportunities, right? So there's players that recognize it, they see it, they have that visibility, and we need more of that. And what's happening in society, where we're trying to muzzle the truth, has me afraid. It means that people in certain identities are going to have to do even more. And we're going to get people that are going to retaliate even more and think that we're woke, but there's no alternative. And that's why I am eternally grateful for who you two are as human beings, and just the perspective that you always bring to conversations and the table. I enjoy this conversation. This conversation could probably go on for another 4 hours. But I think we all have other things to do, and there probably will be more topics that come along. But Mia Jackson, thank you so much for jumping on today and allowing us to do a quick recap of the Final Four. And Beverly, again, thank you for jumping on and bringing your perspective as well. This is your host, Angela Taylor, with Unlocking the Club. This has been another special episode of Unlocking the Club Sister Talk with Mia Jackson and Beverly Oden. Stay tuned. There'll be more of these on Facebook Live and on our podcast because we all have voices. We all want to make sure that we share our story, we unlock the truth, and we reclaim our power for many different identities. And so that people have a little different perspective on the narratives that we all can influence. And so we hope you enjoyed this conversation with us today. And until the next March Madness, Stanford, come on, we got to get it together, Stanford Cardinal. All right, Mia, Bev, thanks for joining me today.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Bye. Now go watch the walk.